Hello, everyone. I'm Weston, joined by Evan, and welcome to episode 3 of the Rangers Gameplan Podcast, where we discuss the week that was the New York Rangers. And from last week, going on a 4-game winning streak, including a weekend that ended with 13 goals, to a much more up and down week overall for the Rangers.
Yeah, it was we said last week that we definitely didn't expect them to, win 6 and 7 nothing all three of those games, but
No.
there was definitely a lot more negative than I guess we expected. Um, you know, at the end of the day, you were playing two teams who have struggled quite a bit recently. I mean, the Hurricanes didn't look the best leading into that game on Tuesday. And the Florida Panthers gave up 12 goals in their prior two games before playing the Rangers. So you would have liked to see maybe, some more comfortable wins. Tuesday was really the only true negative out of the week. But everything that went wrong in that game kind of also went wrong in the other two. So it's, they're not necessarily in the clear for the other two wins.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, Tuesday, they got outplayed the whole game. I remember watching that game after the second period. I really did not expect them to win it. And I mean, even, the players in Gallant said after the game that they got outplayed for that full 60 minutes. I once Kako scored that goal, midway through the third, I kind of felt like there might be a chance they'd have another one of those miracle wins where they don't deserve it, but they get it anyway. But this time that just didn't happen. Um, they did that game. They only got three shots in the first, I believe, or it was either that game or the Thursday game against Carolina. But that also happened on Saturday.
Yeah.
So,
The
um,
first Carolina game was they had quite a few shots in the first, but then the next two were
yeah,
three apiece.
that's it. I mean, it's one of those things. I guess my main complaint in terms of that would be I would just like to see this team give 100% of their effort for a full 60 minutes, which doesn't happen very often with them. I mean, um, we've said multiple times that it seems like they've kind of just been gearing up for the playoffs pretty much the whole season. So they don't really, kind of empty the tank on most nights. I think they just really want to get into that playoff spot, which they could do tonight potentially as we're recording this,
Yeah.
or tomorrow at home. But they basically have it clinched, barring a monumental collapse. So it's not necessarily the biggest deal in the world, but you just like to kind of get it over with and just have your spot locked up. I think more so now than ever, they're not necessarily going all out in these games, for the reason being they've added a couple veterans to this team who have been on many 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 long playoff runs. If you specifically Patrick Kane, if you listen to his interviews, he's very adamant on talking about staying healthy, this time of year leading into the playoffs. He's not saying to throw the games away or anything, but he keeps preaching on that, just to keep your guys healthy. Obviously, keep building on your game, but don't, do anything too risky, and don't necessarily give 110% every night leading, into
Mm-hmm.
this final stretch. For the reason being that you've had your playoff spot locked up for months now. I mean, since December, January, something like that. Um, they've been locked into third place. There's a potential they could pass the Devils or the Hurricanes in the standings, but I think that might not necessarily be too realistic. Just being that it they'd kind of have to go on another huge win streak, and one or both of those teams would have to significantly fall off.
Yeah.
The one positive I think I can say out of the past, I'd say couple weeks, is I don't think Devils and Canes fans feel as good about themselves as they did maybe a month ago.
No.
Um,
And they shouldn't.
kind of the vibe around Devils fans specifically is they're really not feeling too hot. Um, a lot of these games are nail biters when they really shouldn't be for them. They almost lost to the Senators, who obviously it's not like they're a bottom three team in the league or anything, but the Devils should win that game comfortably, and they're just giving up a lot of goals recently, and they're kind of scoring, outscoring their problems, but the vibe around that are their fan base has completely changed compared to really the whole season.
Definitely. And I was looking it up. So the last time the Devils won back-to-back games was the 11th and 12th, and it was Montreal and Carolina.
Okay, yeah.
And for the
Yeah.
Hurricanes, I want to say it was around the same time that they had won back-to-back games, and it was Montreal and a 1-0 win over Philly. So they have both been on a very up and down roller coaster for the past couple of weeks, whereas the Rangers, and granted, this week was not the best or the prettiest week by any means, but they still got 4 of 6 points. They still went into Carolina and won. And the week previous won 4 in a row, including a 13-goal weekend.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think you see all 3 teams in the Metro kind of going in different directions, because whereas the Canes and Devils definitely are in that sort of like, oh, we are not feeling great heading into the playoffs, the Rangers have every reason in the world to feel confident. The veterans are the veterans. I'm not going to concern myself with the last couple weeks if going into the playoffs, Panarin, Zibanejad, Kane, Tarasenko, if they look like they're a little bit off, or Kreider as well. The kids line looks great. We'll have to talk about that a little bit later on.
Mm-hmm.
The defense, I'm not even going to mention. It's not worth it. Same issue as every week. We know what we're getting with the defense. Shesterkin, on the other hand, has completely come out of it. He's on the other side. He's seen the light. And he has, like, going into the playoffs with the way he's playing, I don't know how you couldn't have confidence just oozing out of the locker room right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like you said before, the vets are the vets, and it kind of ties into what I was saying before. Patrick Kane, and not only him, but a lot of these veteran guys have really been preaching on how important it is to kind of. They won't openly come out and say it, but they're all, everyone around the league kind of knows how it is around this time. If you have your playoff spot locked up, you're kind of just going to cruise through games. Obviously, they're not going to openly say that in an interview or anything like that, but you could clearly see that they're not fully giving all their effort. I mean, they're still winning their games. I believe they're 8-1-1 in their last 10, something like that.
Yes, I believe so.
Obviously, they're not struggling like they were a few weeks ago. But as long as they're winning these games, and like I said, there's a potential they could possibly make some noise in the standings, but that's not really what I'm concerned about. The one thing I wanted to mention is, I mean, the Devils specifically, and I'm not going to come out here and talk shit about the Devils for an hour, but they have really not looked great for the past few weeks, and all season it seemed like everything was sunshine and rainbows for them, but they haven't really had to face adversity or kind of a win drought at all during this whole season. Another thing that I actually stumbled across on Twitter is Vanacek struggles heavily at the end of every season. And we're seeing that again. I mean, I'm not saying he gives up 6 goals, every game towards the end of the season, but his numbers significantly drop off towards the end of the year every year. Who knows what's going to happen in the playoffs, but I just think, maybe he's a little tired or something like that. This is probably the biggest role he's been given. And the defense in front of him has not looked great. So, like I said, the past couple episodes, all that matters right now is making sure that the Rangers feel confident within themselves and let the rest take care of itself. And right now, what we're seeing is the Rangers, they have every reason in the world to feel confident right now, and the teams that they're going to be playing feel the exact opposite. So, there's still some games left, so we'll see what happens. But this is exactly what, me personally, what I was asking for, for a while. I don't care about the standings. I don't care about home ice or any of that. Just feel confident about yourself, and I feel like everything's gonna, take care of itself. Especially when Igor's playing the way he has. He's completely flipped the switch after he had that, mini, little struggle spout that he had, but it wasn't anything too too wild, but ever since then he's been ridiculous. And like you said, the defense is what it is. This whole fan base kind of knows, what we're going to be getting there. But like I said specifically last week, this team just seems to completely flip a switch and play entirely different when the games matter. So, if they're kind of just cruising their way right now and they're still winning 8 out of 10, I think they're going to be scary when they actually try when it's playoff time, because if they're winning the vast majority of their games right now and they're really not even trying to, then this team could make a very deep run when they're fully into it come playoff time.
100%. I'm with you with that. I And it's not that they're completely not trying. It's just there's some forecheck moments that you see that they're probably not going to lay out for it. They're not going to dive headfirst into a blocked shot. It's not that they're completely giving up. They know where they are in the standings. They're not going to kill themselves. And really, after the first game of the season, it was very clear where the Rangers' headspace was, which was get back to the playoffs and make up for what happened last year, which it was a bit sketchy there with different valleys they would go through, but the way they've played recently, heading into it, against some of the opponents that they've done it against, you feel great. Igor Shesterkin this week, I thought, the only reason you even flirted with a point on Tuesday and straight up drug them to the win on Thursday. Mm-hmm. He was, the Carolina game on Thursday, I want to say shots were 30-16, and you win that game 2-1 in regulation.
Yeah. And I mean, not to take any credit away from him, the one thing that I will say about Thursday's game is I feel like the shot differential didn't tell the full story. That last 20 minutes, I think they completely dominated that third period. They just really didn't get too many shots the whole game. Obviously, like I said, I'm not trying to take any credit away from him, but I also don't want to, make it seem like this team kind of just lucked their way into a couple wins this week. I think in terms of the effort thing we touched on, it's a matter of it's pretty rare that they actually go into a game fully locked in right away. I think especially after you just won 6 and 7-0 over the weekend, it's very difficult to kind of adjust from everything going your way to having to play the number one team in your division. And they basically didn't have to try whatsoever, in those past 2 weekend games, and then they immediately have to play one of the best teams in the league. So that's not an excuse by any means or anything like that. I just think they, as long as they're in the regular season, they will kind of cruise until they know they can't. You know what I'm saying? I mean, when they put up 3 shots in the first period, they go into the locker room and they're like, hey, we are not scoring 6 goals in the first period tonight. Let's actually give it our all. And then they pulled out with a win. That's what I think happened. More so in the Panthers game, I think that happened, because I think they went into that game, really expecting to kind of win easily. And they were held to 3 shots in the first period, and then I think they ended up with like 36 or 38 or something like that. So they clearly, like I was just saying, they kind of will just cruise their way through a game until they can't anymore.
It's not even, because we've touched on it before and you've said it, where they'll get up for the big games. It's to the point now where they just get up for the big moments of the game. And it really isn't. It's kind of funny. I definitely don't think shots were 30-16. It didn't feel like that. It felt like they got outplayed, but not double the shots outplayed.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And I think I guess my number one issue with this team, specifically this past week, but it's carried over into the games prior, the power play has been abysmal. And it's one of those things. I'm not fully concerned about it. I don't, I'm not super high on the panic meter, because if you look at the personnel on both power play units, I find it pretty much impossible for them to not figure it out.
Yeah.
Personally, I would put Tarasenko on the first power play unit, but I don't think it matters too much. That's kind of just personal preference. Whether it's Patrick Kane, Tarasenko, any combination of those guys will eventually figure it out. We just have to hope it happens leading into the playoffs rather than them
Yeah.
kind of finding it midway through the first round. You would like to see them kind of start to heat up pretty soon. But like I said, I would find it very hard to believe that they don't figure it out to some degree. Um,
You have that
like you said before, it the shot differential didn't feel like that because they had a few power plays and they definitely had momentum, shifts during the game, but they weren't getting shots. Like the biggest issue with the power play is they don't shoot the puck.
Yeah.
And they're trying to be way too cute with it, and I think they know that. So, like I said, I'm not super concerned about it. With those players, it's very hard for them to not make adjustments and to figure things out. So
I can practically see the script that's just there's going to be one game in this coming week. It's going to be the first shot on the power play goes in, they go to the shooting mindset, and it's going to be fine. But I will also double down on what you said of getting that together before you make it to the playoffs. I'm not concerned too much about it because obviously power plays in the playoffs are a hot commodity and you don't get a ton of them. But you do absolutely have to figure that out leading into it because if you don't have the power play cooking and you can't capitalize when you get that one, maybe two power plays per game, and you can't turn that at least into a goal or at least heavy sustained offensive pressure, that can come back and bite you. And
yeah,
that's one thing that.
yeah.
But also to also just totally take credit for what you said. There is too much sheer talent on that team, especially on the top end for the two power play units, to not just luck into goals. It's too loaded to not.
Absolutely. And I mean, to touch on that a little bit more, it's one of those things. Adam Fox is one of, if not the best power play quarterback, so to speak. In terms of defensemen, Panarin has been a top 3, 4 playmaker in the league since he entered it. You obviously have Patrick Kane and Mika Zibanejad is one of he's easily top 5 one timers.
Mm-hmm.
In the league, and then Kreider is, in my opinion, and it has been my opinion for many years that he's the best net front player in the entire league. He's shown it time and time again, and he's having a very quiet season in terms of production. I think he deserves a lot more credit than he's getting. Like you said before, in the playoffs, power plays are a hot commodity, and you're not necessarily going to win or lose a series because of your power play. But my concern is just if you look at the playoffs last year, the reason the Rangers had all those, comeback games, and they obviously came back down 3-1 in the series, they got themselves out of that because of their power play. When they're down a couple goals in the game, that's their foot in the door to change the momentum, or at least it was last year.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5v5 scoring has been much better, in the past month or so, but it's come at the cost of the power play. So I think it balances out a little bit, and like we both said, they're gonna find it eventually on the power play. They're just simply too good, but my concern is, let's say they find themselves down in a series or down in a big game and they're down a couple goals. I just don't know how this team will respond to that without the power play like they did in the last playoffs.
Yeah, it's a good point, but you have to imagine it just. I don't want to say sorts itself out because that seems like a lazy excuse and a lazy way to get through it. But you have it. I don't disagree with Tarasenko moved up to the first one. I think that would be a good move for them. And that also could kind of lead into the line changes because whoopity doodah, they changed them again.
Yeah.
I would Tarasenko on the first PP would be nice. I think that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
my
I'm just falling in
thought
love with
process
that as I think about it.
my thought process behind that is he is obviously one of the best pure goal scorers in the league. And I think that just kind of forces them more into a shooting mindset. Now, it's not like I don't think Patrick Kane can contribute to the first power play unit. I was thinking about this, a couple times this week. Being that I'm of the opinion that I want Tarasenko moved up, I have the feeling that one of these games, Patrick Kane is just going to have like 3 assists on the power play just because I said that. So if that happens, I will be very happy. Now, if they continue to struggle, I would like to just see that one change for the only reason being that maybe they will actually shoot. And I think when he was on the first power play unit, I think he had like a couple assists on the power play
Mm.
when he was up there. So I think if it worked a little bit, I would just go back to it if they continue to struggle. Like I said, that power play unit, the first power play unit is some video game type stuff. So I have the feeling they're just gonna start lighting it up pretty soon. And I mean, kind of the theme of the past two episodes is like I have the feeling that we could break this down all we want, but soon as the games really start to matter in the playoffs, I have the feeling they're just going to come through on the power play. They've just proven that, the past two seasons. So we could sit here and complain about it, but I just have the feeling, there's going to be some clutch power play goals and stuff, and we're going to forget all about this. Hopefully that's the case, but I genuinely believe it will, end up working itself out.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And then to get into the changes for the team over the week, Evan, do you remember, like, I don't know, a week ago, coincidentally a week ago, when we said, hey, these lines are great and you should just leave them as such and not touch them for the rest of the way?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I definitely remember that.
yeah.
Yeah,
So would
and
you like to?
I for a second when we were saying that, I kind of expected it to actually happen, which I guess is my fault.
Expectations the gateway to disappointment, bud. Yeah. So would you like to take a guess at what Gerard Gallant had did to the team during the week and during the games?
I mean, during the games, I can't think of the specifics off the top of my head, but I just remember seeing some weird combinations out there, and I was just like, "Oh, it started." That's kind of all. I don't remember any of the actual lines. I just remember seeing like VZ out there with Panarin at one point, and I was like, "Oh, here we go."
You blacked out at that moment in time, seeing
Yeah.
Jimmy VC catch a pass from Panarin. I don't blame you. I want to say I had just looked it up as well to see them. I want to say it was Kane or Panarin moved back with Kane and Trocheck.
Yeah, I
Which,
remember that. Yeah.
like, theoretically, I don't have a problem with that. But if that is the line, you have to sit Vincent Trocheck down in the locker room and on no uncertain terms say, if you get the puck, shoot it. Because they're not
Yeah.
going to.
Yeah.
Please,
Yeah.
I'm begging you, shoot the puck.
And the one thing that I guess is positive is the beat reporters were tweeting out this morning that the lines went back to the ones that we liked and that we were preaching for today. So that does not guarantee anything. But I guess it's kind of a positive as we speak right now.
That is
So we'll see what happens. If they struggle for a single shift tomorrow, they will be changed again. So I'm not going to get my hopes up. It's going to happen probably every single game they play for the rest of the season. So at least as of right now, they're back to what we want them as, but it's just not going to last.
It's going to be beautiful by minute 15 of the game tomorrow against the Blue Jackets that you have Mika Zibanejad centering Mott and VC on the fourth line.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You know, it. I don't even know what to say about it at this point because it feels like we're nitpicking, but it's really not because it hasn't worked. And I think Gallant is kind of hypnotized into thinking that it works just because they've lucked their way into wins when he does it, but it's not like he puts a new line combination together and they score 3 goals. That's never happened, and for some reason I think he feels as if it does. And he's just not going to change. That's just his coaching style. It is what it is. But I would really like it to stop. There's really just no point in complaining about it anymore. So we'll see what happens.
It's turned into just a desperate plea at this point to let them exist and not just take a dice roller and make a new line every time you feel like it. And go figure, on Saturday, the only line that worked consistently well was the line that you didn't mess with.
Yeah, and another thing too is he actually fed the kid line a lot of ice time in that game.
That was good.
And
I was astonished
that
to
was
see
awesome. They all looked really comfortable, and I don't think they've looked uncomfortable before that, but I think you really started to see like constant strings of sustained offensive zone time from that specific line from them. They were holding on to the puck and just extending plays in the offensive zone every time they were on the ice.
I,
And it's one of those things in for the entire season that they've, or at least for the time they've been together, they have at least a couple grade A scoring chances per game.
mhm.
And sometimes they just, they go a few games without, potting any of them.
Yeah.
But in that game, obviously, all three of them scored, and they all looked phenomenal. They were all, pretty, some good goals too. It's not like they were just,
Yeah, these weren't
kind of lucking
cheapies.
themselves in off Bobrovsky. They were actually some really nice goals in that game.
Yeah, they weren't cheap by any means. And I will give credit to Gerard Gallant. At least over the past couple weeks, when line changes have come and gone, it seems like he's figured out, like, okay, I'm not going to touch them. They have chemistry, they've worked well, they'll figure it out. And really, I'd say debatably, and this is going to be a very, I'm going to get crucified for saying this, consistently, they've been maybe the best line for the lone reason it feels like every game they're good for at least one or two grade A scoring chances. And they're just so solid in the defensive zone. It's insane that the
Yeah,
kids line is the most responsible of any of them. And it's not that they're playing scared, because they're clearly not at this point. They just play great defense in behind their own blue line. It's astonishing, and coming right when they're almost at least Heedle's due for contract. Not too long. Is it Heedle that I'm thinking of? That's gonna.
it's Heedle, yeah, and you know, obviously not trying to be negative, but it is kind of beneficial for the Rangers standpoint that he slowed down a little bit because
Yeah.
at one point I thought he was going to score like 35 goals this season.
Yeah.
And who knows, he might, because he's the streakiest player ever. And we still have like 9 or 10 games left. So he very well could just end up with 35. But for I think this is the first time we've actually talked about it. This season is really important that they've gone all in, just because we have no idea what's going to happen with the contracts. Miller is due for a contract. I believe Laugh is due for a contract, and obviously Heedle and Lindgren. So I don't know what's going to happen. If they, hopefully they win the whole thing, and I will ascend into the clouds, and none of the cap space issues matter to me. But it's kind of something to think about. Just to touch on a little bit. Obviously, we don't want to fully talk about that because we have more important things at hand coming up. But in terms of Heedle, I think he's going to get the most money out of all of them. I think Miller getting suspended and maybe struggling a bit in the past like month and a half has kind of hurt his contract talks a little bit.
I'm almost happy
I
about that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, because all season I thought he was gonna make maybe 5 or 6 million per
Yeah.
year. Um, I'm not saying he'll only get like two, but I think it's definitely dropped down from that point. Um, it's they're obviously very tied to the cap, and Chris Drury somehow managed to get Patrick Kane on this team. So if he could somehow maneuver his way around keeping all of the young guys, I wouldn't put it past him. Especially because it's not like any of them are necessarily elite superstars at this point in time.
No.
So it's not like you have to worry about one of them getting like 8 or 9 million or anything. It's just a matter of they literally have no money and they kind of just have to find a way to create cap space, whether it being trading guys or reworking contracts, whatever it may be. That's more of an off-season conversation, but it's when you have games like this, it's kind of hard to be fully happy about it just because it's like all of these guys have to get re-signed and they kind of can't right now.
There's
So
so much money
obviously you're
needs.
happy about the win, but in a game where all three of them score, it's like
Oh.
you're kind of thinking about like, can we even keep all of them? Like I don't know.
I will say, for the Rangers' credit, I have to imagine Laffy won't be too expensive, because even though he started to have a he's had a nice season, but it's definitely not been anywhere near what a lot of people thought you would get from Lafreniere on a consistent basis.
Hmm.
Heedle has had ups and downs. Recently, it's been solid again, which isn't the best. Ryan Lindgren isn't going anywhere for the lone reason of he has the Rangers by the balls, if I'm being honest, with Adam Fox, because they are a package deal through and through.
Yeah,
Miller
yeah.
scares me. Miller really scares me. Like, I get this weird feeling that some random team is going to come out of the
Yeah, I
woodworks
was
and
just gonna
say
say that. I
six,
think
$7 million.
out of any of them, Miller is the most susceptible to a team kind of throwing, money bags at him. I think
Yeah,
more so than any of the other ones.
I
Um,
I could definitely
that's
see
not to
some.
take anything away from any of, anyone else. I just think obviously young, talented defensemen don't grow on trees, so somebody is gonna be willing to, give him more than what the Rangers offer. I could at least I'm pretty confident that there will be an offer out there that is
Mhm.
more than what the Rangers will put up. It's just a matter of I think he would rather just play here, especially that they're a contending team.
Yeah, that is definitely the thing the Rangers have going for them is the free agents they do have all seemingly not just like are all right being in New York, but genuinely love New York, love the Rangers, and are very happy. It's not that any of them have even so much as a indifferent opinion. They all seem happy to be here, and especially now becoming what looks like a contender over the past 2 seasons is going to help them.
Hmm.
And I think the age of them also could contribute because I don't know that. And again, this is just me completely spitballing and saying things off the top of my head that are probably untrue, but I'm going to say them anyway. I don't think you'd look at a person like Philip Hedl or Alexei Lafreniere or Keandre Miller who would go to one of those teams that would just throw them a boatload of money because they'd probably bring them in there being like, ah, yes, a veteran presence. You've been in the league for a while, and we need help
Yeah,
at blank.
yeah, hmm yeah,
Which,
and I mean, in terms of the contract talks, I've said this for a while. The NHL, more than any of the other sports leagues, is very lacking on smart GMs. And I think that has been proven, um, specifically last season where Joe Sakic built what was basically a super team by the NHL standards. Like nobody really came close to the Avalanche all season last year. And I think it's because it was just kind of a couple years of him making smart decisions. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of GMs in this league have a bad reputation of throwing money at players just for the sake of bringing someone in.
mhm.
Um, you know what I'm saying? Like in terms of Miller and I think maybe Hedel, I think there's a handful of teams out there that will pretty much give them whatever they want within reason. So that's the only thing that scares me. Um, you know, the one guy that I really we just can't lose, like you said, is definitely Ryan Lindgren. It's obviously they've played significantly worse without him, but not only that, it's not difficult to figure out why. I mean, he's easily the best pure defensive defenseman on the team. Um, Obviously Fox is a Norris Trophy winner and he's the best all around player. But Ryan Lindgren is the hardest player on this roster to play against. He's very responsible in his own end, and he's just completely all about defense. You're not gonna, you will never see Ryan Lindgren getting caught trying to make a play in the offensive zone, and it leads to a turn on one, a 2-on-1. That just simply doesn't happen. And not many teams, if any, really truly have that. Apart from a select few. So I would give him really whatever he wants, and I wouldn't sign him for any less than like 5 or 6 years. He's not old, and it's one of those things. In order to fully unlock Adam Fox, he has to be on this team. I said it last week. They have not only played together, but they have been a pair in virtually every single hockey game they have played since they were 15 or 16 years old. So it's you could rip on Adam Fox a little bit if you want for not being able to step up when he's out, but it's very difficult to make adjustments when you lose your defensive partner of 8 years, going on 8 or 9 years. So
Well, it's also the fact of I wouldn't even necessarily say it's Adam Fox playing worse, because I don't think his play really changes. It's that he doesn't have that security blanket back there to, I don't want to say mop up his mistake, but Mikala or Schneider, was he paired with Schneider for like a game, or am I just
It was
off
a
my
game.
rocker?
Yeah,
Okay, thank God I haven't
they
lost.
jumbled around the pairs a little bit. Um, he was with Schneider for a little bit. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean it's definitely exactly that. Where Adam Fox is definitely going to try to to make that elite play. It's not like he's jumping all the way up in the offensive zone, but he will take risks from time to time. And Ryan Lindgren is the complete opposite, where he's not a stay-at-home defenseman. He's definitely not a statue or anything like that, but he's completely not a risk taker, and he is like I said before, he is just a pure defensive defenseman. That's what you're going to get out of him. And I think, especially in terms of Adam Fox's mindset, if you think about it, pretty much all of his development as a hockey player has been next to Ryan Lindgren. So it's, you know what I'm saying? It's
yeah,
not like, like I said, they were playing on the, USA development team since they were 14, 15, 16 up until now. So all of his development as a hockey player and his play style has been with Ryan Lindgren in mind. So it's not really tough to figure out why. It's not like he's terrible without him, but he's definitely not the same player without Lindgren.
definitely not. I will say also briefly, a positive that you have going for the Rangers with Ryan Lindgren going into a contract negotiation is he has had some injuries, so teams are going to look at that, especially with his physical play, and also teams just don't get up for defensive defensemen anymore. Like they don't.
Not at all.
People do
Yeah.
not find that sexy. They don't. It's not that they don't want it. They just want that paired with offense. And if you can't get a little bit of offense with it, it's out the window. You can look at Norris voting over the past decade to see that pure defense is just not looked at the same way that it was at some point. And so that could definitely aid in that going
Yeah,
into
and
it.
I think, kind of to tie into that, I don't feel confident that another team will completely unload, the bank for Ryan Lindgren. I feel like it could happen with Keandre Miller. I have no faith in anybody doing that for Lindgren.
I adore him, but yeah,
Obviously, yeah, that's not to take anything away from him.
I don't
It's
see
just the
someone
way
walking
the
out of the
league
woodwork.
is. Like,
Yeah, I don't see someone coming out of the woodworks to say, "All right, here's $6 million for Ryan Lindgren."
yeah, and I think it's because of what I said before, where a lot of these GMs, as sad as it is to say, think that they have a Ryan Lindgren on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of GMs think that they have a guy like that. That's why you see, like, whenever this defenseman that is pretty bad with advanced stats and stuff like that gets traded for a haul at the deadline, it's because of that. Because a lot of these GMs are, I don't want to say out of touch. I'm not trying to sound like an armchair GM right now, but it's true. It is absolutely true, because every year one of the worst analytical defensemen gets traded for several picks and like two prospects. And that's because they think that is a Ryan Lindgren
Mm-hmm.
when it's just simply not. So nobody, I don't think any team in the league values Ryan Lindgren as much as the Rangers, whereas Keandre Miller, they're going to see, oh, young, fast, scores sometimes. Let's give him $7 million. That's just how the mindset of 90% of the GMs in the league are. So I'm not concerned about the Rangers having to outbid anyone necessarily. I think their concern is obviously they just don't have much money at this point, and they're just gonna kind of have to internally figure out how to make it happen. But I'm not concerned about any random team, you know, carving out a nice place in their their on their cap space for Ryan Lindgren. It's just not going to
The
happen.
the Avalanche are gonna call him up and say, "Hey, we have a nice fuck." He's not even on the Avalanche anymore. The Blackhawks are gonna call him up and say, "We have a nice spot for you next to Jack Johnson."
Yeah,
That'll be
yeah, like,
for our
and
top pair.
it's just and that's pretty much all it is. Like I'm just not super concerned about that. A lot, the obviously the game has changed a lot, specifically in the past decade, and it's gotten a lot faster, and it's not very hard to figure out why a lot of the GMs are kind of just going for nothing but speed nowadays. But you obviously need Lindgrens on your roster, a couple of them sprinkled here and there. And I think, Lindgren and Jimmy Vesey and the whole fourth line is one of the most valuable assets to the team because they're hard to play against. And that's, that's something they didn't necessarily have last year, where they didn't have a fourth line that scared anybody, and they didn't really fully click defensively. And obviously their defensive issues have been a theme recently, but like I said, I think they're just going to play entirely different come playoff time. So the makeup of the team is pretty similar, but there's the changes that happened, I think, are immeasurable in terms of the value they provide to the team. Not even just the defensive guys, obviously Kane and Tarasenko, which everybody's talked about, ad nauseum recently. But this team, I feel way, way more confident in than last year's team.
I would 100% agree, because like last year, the fourth line going into the playoffs was Mott, Reeves, and who was centering them?
Yeah, it was Goodrow like sometimes, but he was
really centering them. Good lord.
I think so. Well,
that's fun.
That's where it gets hairy, because we talk about the line changes and stuff like that. Dryden Hunt was on that fourth line more than once in the playoffs last year, so that's why it's a little tough to remember.
No,
because those games you really weren't paying any attention to the fourth line because you knew Dryden Hunt and Ryan Reeves were on it. So they literally did nothing on the ice for the whole game, and they probably had like 7 minutes of ice time. So that is why it's tough to remember who was on the fourth line last year.
And going into this playoff, I'm not saying that the fourth line is going to go out there and just dominate them into the boards and score 7 goals against them. But if for some random reason you had to have the fourth line out against the second line, or even for a short little stint, the top line of the Devils or the Hurricane, again, I don't think they're going to go score a goal. They could grind them for a minute. They could hold it down. I'm not fearful that Mott, Gaudreau, and Vesey are going to make some horrible defensive mistake that just leads to Jack Hughes embarrassing the franchise into the dirt.
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
Not something we could say last year by any means.
Yeah. I mean, last year we were pretty much terrified with any of the forward lines defensively. Obviously they went deep into the playoffs, and it was a very fun, season last year. But they were really, really, really terrible last year defensively, and it wasn't. There wasn't any, pointing fingers. I think they just never found that right combination, and I don't think they had the enough true defensive players, whereas they actually have that now. Like you said, the fourth line as it stands currently is very defensively responsible, and they're going to run into some goals here and there, but at the end of the day, I'm confident with that line being a matchup against a team's first or second line, just because I'm not expecting them to score a goal against them. I just think they're going to tire them out, and they won't necessarily give up, a grade A scoring chance. So that is something they definitely didn't have last year, which was a line that you could actually trust when you were trying to, lock a game down.
Yeah, and I'll say it as well. Loved some of the players on the fourth line last year. Ryan Reeves, I thought, served a very important purpose. That being said, anytime he touched the puck, I could feel my heart out of my head, just like, oh boy, here it comes. They've really, all the forward lines this year, aside from the top, I shouldn't say all the forward lines, the third and fourth line have gotten a lot better defensively, and players that I maintained the opinion back when the Kane trade was happening that Kane might actually make the team worse because of his defensive turnovers, and aside from that gaffer against Montreal, he has not been nowhere near the defensive liability that I thought he was going to be. Mm-hmm. This team feels better forward-wise defensively. The defense as a whole, as far as defensemen, insert any of the past two weeks when we have whinged about how bad the defense is. It's not changing. I'm not going to spend another 30 minutes talking about it.
Yeah, yeah, and to touch on Patrick Kane, I think it's one of those things where before the trade happened and the first couple days where it happened, everybody was making it seem like he literally does not even attempt to play defense, which hasn't been the case, for sure in the past 2 games. You could obviously maybe say that, his first couple games, but he was completely out of sorts and uncomfortable in those games, so I really don't, I obviously don't care about those two. But in the past few games, you actually see him, taking to his assignment and, actually trying to make a defensive play, which I was told doesn't happen. So it's, it's cool that he's, proven those people wrong. And, in terms of him, obviously that has been the most talked about trade since it's happened and before it's happened. But if you look at last year's team, they got Frank Vetrano, who obviously isn't a defensive mastermind either, and he worked just fine. So my whole thought process before the trade happened is if you liked Frank Vetrano, how could you not like Patrick Kane? And I've seen more defensive effort from Patrick Kane than Frank Vetrano. Especially last year, there wasn't a game, even in the playoffs, where they were really anywhere near the shot differential. They were getting outshot by 10 to 15 consistently, and it's because of that, because they really didn't have anyone on the team that, or at least in the forwards, that was a true defensive forward. Or you could obviously put Zibanejad in that conversation when he wants to be, but they simply didn't have as many defensive tools as they do now.
When it's on his own time, Mika Zibanejad is the best 200-foot player in the sport, and when it isn't, he's just kind of there. And I love Mika Zibanejad, but...
Yeah, and I mean, you'll see that a lot in the regular season from him. But the one thing I could confidently say is he's probably the most clutch player on the team. I think you especially saw that last year, at least in the playoffs, because for whatever reason, he just kind of flips a switch and he could just score 2 whenever he wants to. So, he had the tying goal game 7 against Pittsburgh earlier in the series when they were, originally down 3-1. And they were losing going into the second period. He scored like 2 power play goals within a minute and a half. Like he's definitely, built for the playoffs, and that's why I don't necessarily rag on him too much, because I think he might be the most underrated player on the team from Rangers fans specifically.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say, nobody thinks he's good or anything like that. That's obviously not true. But if you ask Rangers fans, like, who are the most important players on the team, Zibanejad is probably like 5th or 6th out of everyone's mouth. So that kind of just goes to show how, like, underappreciated he is, for sure. Like I was saying, I'm not too concerned about him just because he seems to just, flip a switch and produce in the playoffs. So, I guess my theme the past couple weeks has just been a matter of I don't really care what happens right now as long as everybody, just kind of turns it on in the playoffs. Like, I don't care who's producing right now and who's not. Just show me something in the playoffs, and that's all I care about.
It's definitely been a process of fine-tuning, and I want to say flip a switch and talk a little bit about the Florida Panthers game. Because you leave the first period, you're down 2-0, you've been outshot 12-3. You turn it around, you have 4 goals straight, unanswered. You outshoot them 22-9, I want to say, in the second period. And I want to say like 17 to something in the third. Final shots were 42-34 in favor of the Rangers.
Oh, it was 42? I thought it was like 36. Yeah.
Nah, it was 42
that's
to 34.
insane.
Yeah, after getting outshot 12-3 in the first.
Yeah, that's crazy to only have 3 shots in a period and end up with 42. Yeah. And I think that kind of just proves, my point when I say that this team just plays differently when they realize they have to. So I guess that's not necessarily a positive thing, but it also kind of is. You'd like to everything to be sunshine and rainbows,
yeah.
but it just seems like they're not gonna, make us happy until their backs are against the wall. So
Yeah, cough cough 3-1 down last year. But that was the
yeah,
thing I was gonna hit on is you cannot mentally beat them. I don't believe because
yeah,
you have that
yeah,
moment. You're in an opponent. You're in a away stadium. Granted, there were 2 Panthers fans in the entire crowd, but
yeah,
you're
yeah.
not on
That
home
that
ice.
was that was one of the most lopsided, crowds I've ever seen
That
on the
had to
road.
be rough for the Panthers, man.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see because it didn't look as bad on TV, but the people that were at the game taking videos, it was like literally a Rangers home game, and I
It's
was
like,
like,
are you?
"What is going on?" That was insane.
The Snowbirds are coming in clutch, but you have that where you're technically speaking the away team. You get just the piss beat out of you in the first period. You're down 2-0, and then you come back and beat them into the dirt for the remainder of the grave or for the
Hmm.
remainder of the game. You can't mentally beat them. I think it was also great to see that it was the kids that sparked it, as it oftentimes is for some
Yeah,
reason. It's the children or Jacob Truba throwing his helmet at the bench, but whatever works.
yeah.
And
I
so that
think that
ability to
that game. Yeah, go ahead.
not get down on yourselves, and obviously I would prefer them to just simply not be down by multiple goals at any point in the playoffs. But if you leave a first period and you're down 2-0, you're not automatically saying, "Well, all right, what's the next game going to be?" You're not thinking about the next game. They can turn it around. And they've been the comeback kids, the no quit in New York, whatever you want to say. They've been that for the past 2 seasons now. You're really seeing it put on display recently because in the Florida game and the second Carolina game, it was awful first period, turn it around. And
Yeah.
the mental fortitude that they have bodes incredibly well with the playoffs, and especially when they're getting that mental fortitude back.
Yeah, and to harp on what you just said, it's one of those things where not every team has that, and that's one of those things you really can't teach, and you just not every team has that clutch gene in them. Like you said, you'd rather everything just be smooth and them not go down by multiple goals, but that's not going to happen in the playoffs. There's never been a cup winning team that hasn't had adversity in the playoffs. So the fact that they can pull themselves out of it is one of the most underrated parts of the team for sure.
It definitely is. And now
Yeah,
you come up on the. Go on.
yeah. The one thing about the Panthers game is that game specifically could have entirely changed my mood about the team for the reason being that the Panthers, like I said prior, they gave up 6 goals in their past 2 games before that. So if they couldn't find a way to pull that game out and score some goals, I would have been concerned because that's a team that, obviously can't they can't defend. Their goalies have struggled all season, specifically very recently. And if they couldn't find a way to pull that game out, then I would have been very concerned.
Yeah, $10 million Bobrovsky, by the way. Anyway, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's still insane to this day.
that's an incredible
That's just
contract.
crazy. The Patrick Kane goal specifically, like what is going on? Like that was insane.
That that was so bad for them, man.
Also, just kind of to go off topic, but the Senators are winning 2-0, and the Canadians are tied 1-1 with Buffalo. So they could potentially clinch tonight. We'll see. I don't know.
I
Hopefully.
just realized that the other game going on currently is the Devils and Islanders, which means one of those teams has to win tonight, and I'm kind of sad after hearing that.
Oh yeah, that's not good news. That's definitely not good news at
I
all.
mean, I guess you hope for the Islanders to maybe try to steal that away from the Devils. Which, side note, even though it's incredibly unlikely, the amount of shit Rangers fans will give right back to the Devils after this entire season of them telling us how inferior they were is just going to
Yeah,
be
and I mean,
a
it's one
moment.
of those things. It's definitely possible, but it's within reach to pass the Devils for sure. I'm just not getting my hopes up for it. That's why I'm not, talking about it too much. They're 4 points behind them, so it's very doable. I'm not getting my hopes up for it, so I'm not going to sit here and kind of break down both teams' schedules and like hope for it because I don't care that much, and two, it's it's not um something I've been thinking about too much recently.
It's
So
also it's not they're close to each other. The home ice advantage is not going to be this massive thing where you're having to travel cross country.
yeah, they're
And
going to be able to sleep in their own beds the whole series. So that's all that really matters. I mean, they're both teams will take a bus back and forth. Like they're
yeah,
going to sleep in their own beds. There's not going to be a hotel or anything like that. They will sleep in their own beds. So, I think more so from the Rangers side, you've seen, kind of more of a turnout from Rangers fans in that building over the years. So
mm.
that's another reason I'm not super concerned about it. So,
Side note: do you think that because Artemi Panarin is old-fashioned and uses a Nokia, do you think he just has a thatch like cot bed that he sleeps on at night?
I wouldn't doubt it. I would be a little concerned for him just because of the amount of money he makes, and also being that he has a wife. So, but I wouldn't doubt it just because he is, for lack of better term, just weird. Like he's just got a weird personality. So I'm not ruling it out.
I, I'm still not convinced that Artemi Panarin is a real person, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, like it's just everything he says is just he's never had a conversation where he doesn't make a joke, and he, like you said, has a Nokia as a grown man making over $11 million. So, and by the way, that's like not a joke. Like there's proof of this. Like it's not when he first said that I thought he was just kidding, but like there's actual like proof of the Nokia, and I'm like, what?
That would have made the Kane trade so much better if it wouldn't have been so foreseen coming of just like, hey, no
Yeah,
way.
no, I remember talking about that. I was like, I wish that wasn't the worst kept secret in sports at the time because if he just showed up and Patrick Kane was there, I think it would have been the funniest thing in the world because there's no way of him knowing. Like I wish it just happened overnight and nobody knew and it was this huge splash rather than it being basically set in stone for a week and a half because I think
That
the
was borderline
reaction
set for a year. I mean,
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
it was happening. It was a matter of when it eventually comes to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. That would have been hilarious, and I'm definitely upset we never got that.
Uh,
But I mean, in terms of this episode, we pretty much got everything. A lot of it is the same issues, so it's not like anything new has happened. But
it's
at
a matter
least
of who you've played.
yeah,
wanna...
it's they're still winning games, so that's important. But we will still probably have these same complaints like a month from now. So
It's gonna be
we'll
great.
see.
I'll briefly mention the upcoming 4 games for the week. I'm stupid. You play Columbus and then a 3-game road trip where you go to New Jersey, to Buffalo, and to Washington. My biggest wish for the coming week: one, please don't lose to the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yeah,
They are
just don't ruin my night. Just don't do it. Like that would just it's the only way that could happen is if they just don't try tomorrow. So just please just beat them so I don't have to be
simply
upset.
don't lose
Like
to a team that is intentionally trying to be bad.
I'm not asking much. I'm not.
Uh,
Just beat them, please.
The Devils game, I feel it's important, not necessarily that you win, because you can lose that game, and that's fine. Just fight hard. That's a game you have to get up for. That is bring everything
Oh,
you have going into
absolutely.
that game.
Yeah.
Even if you lose it, make them feel as unconfident as you possibly can going into that playoff matchup, because don't lie to ourselves, it's going to be the Rangers and Devils. We know it. We've known it for forever now. The Buffalo and Washington games, just get at least 3 points out of it. I think that should just go without saying for the
Yeah,
weekend.
for sure. I mean, I don't know what their deal is with like randomly getting blown out by the Capitals, but that needs to stop. And Buffalo, for some reason, they play a close game against Buffalo every time, so I'd rather that not happen either. But I'm just gonna expect it. Obviously, beat the Blue Jackets by a lot,
Please.
and Devils. If you lose that game, I'm not upset as long as it's a 1-goal game.
Yeah.
So that's really all I'm asking. And then you'd like to see them, win the other two, but at least 3 points because there's no reason you should really be losing to either one of them.
I've got to say something very briefly because it is just comical. If the Blue Jackets were to double their entire point total for the season, they would be 3 points up over Carolina.
Oh wow, that's insane.
They have 53 points.
That's crazy.
God bless
Yeah,
the
that-
Columbus Blue Jackets and Johnny Hockey, who said he wanted to go to Columbus to win games.
Yeah, and I don't know what he was thinking, but maybe it turns around for him at some point. I would have
Maybe
just
he
stayed in
also-
Calgary if I were him.
Maybe he also had a Nokia and just thought Panarin was still there.
Yeah, that who knows at this point. I mean, for him to say he's going there to win games, maybe like the last time he checked the standings was when Tortorella was the coach and they had like a 17-game win streak or whatever it was. So maybe he thinks that's what's still happening. Who knows? Yeah.
He changes his mind, voids the contract, and goes to Philly in the offseason. You've heard it here first.
Oh, that would be something else for sure.
But yeah,
So,
I think that's been the week. I feel pretty good with what we've talked about.
yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said before, it's all the same issues. So hopefully they stop, but they probably won't, and just keep winning games. That's
my
really
wish
all.
list is everything we just stated, and also the fact that if you continue to if there are problems going into next week, just make them different ones to give us a little bit of diversity.
Yeah,
into
just
the next video.
because at this point, like it's just give me something I don't expect. If you're gonna lose a game, just give me something I'm not expecting, please.
That would be great.
Because-
Artemi Panarin for some reason shot it into his own net. That's particular. That's not.
Yeah,
usual.
that would be interesting to talk about because every Rangers loss in the past 2 seasons has been the exact same game. So I would just appreciate something different.
That's it. That's the only hope I have for the week. But with all that being said, thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back in a week from now to talk about the upcoming 4 games. Until next time.
Hopefully 4-11-0 wins. Hopefully.
4-11-0 wins, and if they're not, we're going to be very angry. So, until next time, thank you all for coming in and watching. I hope you all have a good day. I'm Weston, and as always, go Rangers.
Right, guys. Thanks for listening. Go Rangers.